Okay, so Judaisation is basically the idea that has shaped government policies in Israel, centrally on regional levels, and it's the idea that says that in particular in these two areas of the country, the Galilee and the Negev, there are too many Palestinian citizens and not enough Jewish citizens. And we need to implement policies that will try and change that balance, that combination. And the Galilee and Negev have always been the kind of historic focus of the Judaization drive, because those are the two areas that until today still have most Palestinian citizens compared to other areas of the country. And it's closely related to the mainstream discourse in Israel that describes Palestinian citizens as a demographic threat. Okay, the phrase we've seen before. In other words, a threat simply on the basis that they are Palestinians. Threat on the basis that they're not Jews. Incidentally, that discourse also extends to, doesn't just include Palestinians, as we've seen recently. The harsh, I guess that's putting it nicely, harsh law that was recently passed by the Knesset to tackle illegal immigration, to tackle migrants in Israel. Again, the politicians who passed that law were speaking about the migrants in Israel as being constituting a demographic threat to the Jewish majority. Netanyahu, as finance minister, when he said this in 2003, Palestinian citizens constitute the real demographic problem. Incidentally, he's saying the real demographic problem because a lot of the time the demographic problem is talked about in relation to the Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza, i.e. the idea being, and again this is, if you want to come back to this in the questions, okay, the idea being that Israel has to kind of give up some control of the occupied territories, the territories occupied after 1967, because of the demographic threat, because there's, we're controlling too many Palestinians, etc., etc. But here Netanyahu is saying, no, the real demographic threat is actually our own citizens. This is perhaps it's one of the shortest quotations here, but because of his title, it's probably my favourite. The chair of the Knesset's Ethics Committee in 2010 simply put it like this: the Arabs in Israel are our enemy. And here's Ehud Olmert, and he's speaking here as mayor of Jerusalem in 1998. It's a matter of concern when the non-Jewish population rises a lot faster than the Jewish population. Okay? This is the kind of stuff that doesn't make the Today program when they're talking about Israel being the only democracy in the Middle East. I really wanted to make sure I mentioned Danny Ayalon tonight as well. So this is the Deputy Foreign Minister of Israel. The focus for today is to Judaize the Negev and the Galilee. Danny Ayalon, for those of you who don't know, in his role as Deputy Foreign Minister for Israel, does a lot of excellent public diplomacy for the Palestinians, but that's by accident. And he makes a lot of, he likes making videos on YouTube. Somehow, because he thinks that a large number of views on a YouTube video will mask the kind of disgusting policies that he's advocating here. This is the current housing minister from a couple of years ago, a few years ago. I see it as a national duty to prevent the spread of a population that, to say the least, does not love the state of Israel. If we go on like we have until now, we will lose the Galilee. Right? It's this idea that it's like a foreign occupation of some kind, but they're your own citizens. Populations that should not mix are spreading there. And that's the guy who is in control of housing policy. And again, finally, this is like a local official, just to show how it goes from the highest, high level to the low level. We want to Judaize the Wadi Ara area, that's a specific area in Israel. The state wants to put this place in order so that the Arabs won't rear their heads. Now, I want to point out as well that you see all these quotations, many of them by the highest ranking politicians in the country. None of these quotations resulted in the politician having to resign in scandal or having to kind of, backpedal and apologise for the kinds of things he said. On the contrary, the point here is that this discourse is routine. It's repeated in academic papers, it's repeated in newspaper columns. This idea that the Palestinian citizens are, by the very fact that they're a Palestinian, a threat. And there's a certain logical consistency to that. Once you realise, of course, that the aim of the Zionist project is to create Jewish hegemony in an area where there was and remains still non-Jewish people, Palestinians. So of course they're going to constitute a threat from that perspective. And then just giving a couple of examples of how that then works out in practice. Again, of course, it relates to confiscation of land, and it relates to establishing Jewish communities on the land that's been confiscated. Go through a lot of examples. Just want to mention one, which is of Nazareth and Upper Nazareth. Nazareth, the biggest Palestinian city inside Israel, and for that fact, it was the area around it, and the city itself, was an early target of the Israeli state's drive to Judaize certain areas. And what happened was, the kind of result of the thinking was that they would establish a community, a town called Upper Nazareth, Nazareth Elite, which is, of course, until today. Back in those days, they said stuff kind of, well, I was about to say they say stuff more openly, but of course, I've shown you that they're still pretty open about it today. In the 1950s, an official involved with this, the establishment of Upper Nazareth, the community, said its role would be, quote, to emphasize and safeguard the Jewish character of the Galilee as a whole. In other words, the idea was to create this Nazareth elite overlooking Nazareth, the city of Nazareth, and of course, obviously, on municipal lands belonging to Nazareth. And this is the current mayor, the mayor today of Nazareth elite. Just as Ben-Gurion and Perez said in the 1950s that the Galilee must be Jewish, we say the same about Nazareth elite. The primary goal is to put the brakes on the demographic deterioration. Okay, so again, the same kind of language is being used to shape policies both in the 50s, but also through to the present day. And so that's the Galilee. A quick focus on the Negev again, on this issue of Judaization. Again, this is a Human Rights Watch report from 2008. And they said, when they looked at what the Israeli government's doing in the Negev in the south, they said the motives for, quote, discriminatory, exclusionary and punitive policies in the Negev can be elicited from policy documents and official rhetoric. Like, it doesn't take a genius to work out what's going on there. You just see what people are saying and writing that they're trying to do. Example, Abishai Braverman, and again, I include him because he likes to kind of portray himself as a centrist or a liberal. He said, quote, Zionism needs to travel south to the Negev so that Israel does not turn into a Palestinian state. Talking about the different policies that are going on to develop the Negev. I said I was going to mention the Jewish National Fund again. Jewish National Fund obviously has a British branch which raises money for the kinds of initiatives that they implement in Israel. The Jewish National Fund historically was instrumental in the legislative process of confiscating Palestinian land from expelled Palestinians. And it's still part of the Judaization process today. This is the head of the Jewish National Fund in the US. So he's talking about a project to remake the demographics in the Negev will mean, quote, a certain amount of displacement for the Bedouin. Doesn't sound like that, does it? Just a little bit. And this is more recently reported comments by a Jewish agency official, again, I don't have time to go into it, but another body that is part of the kind of legislative and constitutional framework that enables discrimination. The goal of the plan, talking again about another initiative to establish Jewish communities in the Negev, the north of the Negev this time. The goal of the plan is to grab the last remaining piece of land and thereby prevent further Bedouin incursion. So yeah, it's almost like military language that's being used to describe their own citizens. Right, I've really no idea how I'm doing for time. The fourth example that I'm going to give of policies is the citizenship law, which I guess some of you may have heard of because it's been in the news more recently. Not because the law itself is new, but it's been around for almost a decade, but because the High Court made a ruling about it, which I'll come to later. So since 2003, what was initially described as a temporary law was passed by the Israeli Parliament, and it's been renewed ever since. And in fact, and I think this was probably just a coincidence actually, just a few days after the High Court's decision about this, the Knesset passed it again, renewed this law again. So it's been passed ever since. And what it does is, it means that it is almost impossible for Palestinian citizens, or for all Israeli citizens, but the policy that this affects the most are Palestinian citizens, from living in Israel with their spouse, if the spouse comes from the occupied Palestinian territories and there was